I'm doing your great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop so I can come down to you? That is a great work from 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem, as discussed in the Bible and the book of Nehemiah. Let's discuss how this continues to affect the region and the U.S. and national security today here on the Great Work Podcast.
All right, welcome back, Great Work Podcast. Daily news. Today is Tuesday, August 6th, 2024, and another slow news day, not? So we did not see anything pop off in the Middle East last night, thank God. It's looking less and less likely that that will happen, although before the last time we had a couple days of calm, and then Iran decided to pop off, so who knows? But today we found out that Kamala Harris has picked her vice presidential pick. And who did she pick? My governor. My governor is not a very good governor. So I want to go into kind of like who is Tim Walz, kind of give you the political landscape, because Democrats are getting this wrong. Shocker. The media and Democrats are getting this wrong. After that, I want to talk about the vibe shift, because I talk about it on Twitter a lot, but I kind of want to explain what I mean by it. And then we'll end with kind of like the state of the race and like what could be happening here. So, couple things. Let's start with Walz, though. The media have painted Walz as if he is this like moderate, oh my God, the best thing that could have ever happened. You know, she's really like committed to like the moderating the base. I agree in some ways. Like Tim Walz used to be moderate. He has not been a moderate governor by any means, but his congressional record was moderate. And also if we look at the alternatives, I guess she could have picked, I don't know. Actually, he's kind of one of the more liberal of any of the alternatives that Kamala could have picked. He's more liberal than Bashir. He's more liberal than Shapiro. He's more liberal than Mark Kelly. So he's kind of the most progressive one of that bunch, right? Maybe not Mayor Pete, although Mayor Pete kind of had that too. I think that Walz is the better pick between, I think it was down to him and Shapiro. He's definitely the better pick. Now, he has challenges, but if Kamala had picked Shapiro, she would have all but guaranteed that her convention would be a shit show with pro-Palestine protesters. Something that like maybe Democrats aren't going to like me saying, but this is true. Because I keep seeing this like both sidesism of like, oh, well, there's anti-Semites on the right too. And there absolutely are. But Trump never capitulates to them. So like Trump's daughter is Jewish, you know, she converted for her husband who's Orthodox, modern Orthodox Jewish. Jared had, there were anti-Semitic right-wingers who were saying like he needs to be kicked out because he's loyal to Israel for being Jewish when he was working in the White House. Trump never capitulated. He never fired Jared. He never distanced himself from Jared. He didn't always side with Jared, but like what president sides with one advisor 100% of the time? There are absolutely anti-Semites and crazy racists and people like that on the right, but right-wing politicians, notably Trump, don't capitulate to them. And I think if you look at the pick of Shapiro or against Shapiro and the way it was kind of dragged out this long, I think Jews are going to feel like she didn't choose him just because he's Jewish, which probably was a big factor, right? Because he had the same record as every other candidate in terms of Israel, but he's the only Jewish one. So that's partially why she didn't pick him, right? It was too much for the pro-Palestinians. In the left, they capitulate to them. They have to, and not necessarily win their votes, because I don't think that she ever will win their votes. Like these people, these far lefty protesters, a lot of them don't vote or they vote third party. But how much of a mess and up are they going to make at the convention? I think that's what she was weighing. Furthermore, when people say like, oh, he could have won Pennsylvania, Nate Silver did a piece where he talked about Nate Silver did a piece talking about how much people make, like how much of a difference does the vice presidential pick make, and he set a boost of like 0.2% in their state. That probably isn't, maybe that would make a difference because Pennsylvania will be close, but it probably wouldn't make a big enough difference to outweigh, again, the DNC burning, because that's what happened. The DNC and it probably will still burn, but it would probably burn more if the pro-Palestinians were really mad. I wonder what her internals looked like for Shapiro in like Michigan. I don't know. So we're going to see. But it's it's an interesting pick again because the Democrats have, Shapiro won a race in a swing state. Pennsylvania is like the new Florida. Shapiro won there. If he had skeletons in his closet, they probably came out in that race, and he won that race pretty handily. What the Democrats now have is they have a ticket of 2 candidates that come from deep blue states without really opposition parties, because we'll go into Minnesota in a minute, and if there are skeletons in the closets of Walz and Kamala, they probably haven't come out yet because they've not run really contentious races. We saw evidence of that with the Doug Emhoff story from over the weekend. There was a story that came out, it really only popped off on Saturday, and Mark Halperin is the one who pointed this out on Megyn Kelly yesterday. Mark Halperin's like a really well-respected MSNBC reporter who he got Me Too'd back in like 2018 or whenever that popped off, and he now is doing a YouTube show, and I think he has really good sources in both camps, so high up in the Trump camp, high up in the Kamala camp, high up in the DNC, and he's been breaking a lot of stories, and I think he gives really good, like, fair coverage. It's not super biased to the right, and it's not super biased to the left, in my opinion. He was talking about how he had a source say that what they're kind of realizing when they're vetting the vice presidential candidates is they're kind of worried that all of the vetting has not been sufficiently done for Kamala Harris. And the reason for that is we saw evidence of it with the Doug Emhoff story. So Kamala Harris's husband, Doug Emhoff, was married. His first marriage, I believe this was 2 marriages ago, his first marriage ended because he got the nanny pregnant. Or he was having an affair with the nanny, and unnamed sources said that she got pregnant, and that nanny doesn't have a 14-year-old. This was 14 years ago. So either the pregnancy ended, unfortunately, early by choice or by not, right? And an abortion, that probably wouldn't matter that much to the Democrats anyways, but that would be a bigger story if he was a Republican. And there's a lot of reasons this doesn't fully matter, right? Doug Emhoff is not on the ticket. It was a long time ago. He seems to have a good relationship with that ex-wife. The problem is, if there's a story that's like that in Kamala's closet and it hasn't come out yet, that story should have come out when she was running for vice president. Why didn't it? That story should have come out when she was running for the Senate. That happened 14 years ago. That should have come out a long time ago. It never did. Why? Well, it's because Kamala's from California, which is a deep blue state. I believe the last time she ran for Senate there, she didn't even have a Republican challenger. They don't have these like really tough primaries to go through, primary or general elections. If the media kind of knows that the Republican's not going to win, it's not really going to be close. It's not the same as running in an intense race against an actual challenger. So that's how Kamala came to be. So really, again, she has not run in a contentious race because she didn't make it to the point when it would have been really contentious in the Democratic primary for president in 2020. She's never had like a legitimate challenge. And I've been saying this, there's 15 years of Republican oppo on her that could be ready to drop at any moment because it's never been used before. It'll be a new narrative versus an old narrative. But then beyond that, Tim Walz is the same thing. There is no opposition in Minnesota, no opposition party. And at least people don't fake that there's an opposition party in California. In Minnesota, they pretend that there is. So let me explain this to you for those who are not familiar. In Minnesota, the Democratic Party is not called the Democrat Party of Minnesota. It's called the DFL, the Democrat Farmer Laborers. And their coalition used to be inner city liberals in Minneapolis and St. Paul, the 4th and 5th congressional districts, plus CD, like the outstate suburbs. Usually rural districts are more lean right, but in Minnesota, the districts that are outstate, CD1, CD7, had traditionally voted Democrat up until 2018. CD8 is like the northern exurbs of the Twin Cities up to Canada on the like eastern half of the state. CD7 is basically the same thing except on the western half of the state bordering like South Dakota. And then CD1, which is what Tim Walz was the congressman for years, is the southernmost like exurbs of the Twin Cities down to like Iowa. And it's mainly rural, like farming land. So Tim Walz won that seat for years, and that was an R+7 district based on its Cook political ranking, meaning that there were +7 more Republicans in that district, that type of margin versus like Democrats, which means it should be an easy Republican district. In a state like Nebraska, an R+5 is a solid Republican state district, but for some reason, in Minnesota, Walz was able to win it. Now, is that because he was a moderate? No, it's not. It was, I mean, like he was more moderate at the time. That's true, but that's not why he kept winning. He kept winning because, like I said, there's no opposition party in Minnesota. And the candidate that the Republican Party kept running against Walz was not a great candidate. He had name ID, Jim Hagedorn. Unfortunately, he's since passed away from cancer. But Hagedorn's dad, I believe, or uncle, was a congressman in that district a long time ago. So he should have had, name ID. People should have remembered his name. They did. They just preferred Walz. So they kept voting for him. In 2016, Trump won that district by 10 points. Again, this was a district that was typically voting like slightly to the right in presidential, but it would vote for the Democrats still because of the DFL, like that they just like consistently voted for Democrats. I think Hagedorn lost that by like 2,500 votes, but he couldn't really raise any money. He finally won that seat in 2018 when Walz didn't run again and he ran for governor. And again, being that there's no opposition party really, I mean, I believe the Republicans might have had like a 1-seat majority in either the House or Senate, but that really isn't like that much of a check on the governor's mansion, and he's passed some pretty left-wing policies. He spent through a $20 billion surplus, and he still raised taxes, okay? This is a tax and spend liberal through and through. At least that's how he governed as a governor. I'm already seeing now that people are trying to say, group his congressional record in with his governor record. It's not. As soon as he was unburdened by what had been, which was like trying to win a Republican district, I just outdid myself with that reference. As soon as he didn't have to do that anymore, he sure didn't. Like I said, he raised taxes in a $20 billion surplus. Who the hell does that? Well, Tim Walz does. He passed a law saying that children can be taken away from their parents if the parents do not give them gender-affirming care. That's pretty radical. Even a lot of Democrats don't agree with that, but that's something that Tim Walz passed. That's not something that a moderate would typically pass, in my opinion. But that to me isn't the biggest problem with Walz. The biggest problem with Walz is the 2020 riots, which Kamala Harris also played a role in, that started in Minneapolis. And you guys think I'm annoying with bringing up that I went to Ramallah one time in 2017? I lived in the middle of the 2020 riots in Minneapolis, okay? I lived a mile from them. I couldn't leave my house, okay? So there was that. And also there's a huge scandal where he lost was it $250 million or $500 million in a massive fraud scheme that again, just nobody talks about because it's kind of a one-party state. So these are things that clearly when they were vetting him, they said, this is a better alternative than burning it down with, the pro-Palestine people. Notably, Tim Walz is also a Zionist. So he spoke at an AIPAC policy conference. I believe he's raised money from AIPAC before, and he has done a meeting with Bibi Netanyahu. So I posted a video earlier, like a picture of him and Bibi. But it's very interesting to me. Again, all of the Democrats had the same exact thoughts on Israel, but they can't pick Shapiro because they have to capitulate to their anti-Semitic left. But anyways, so Walz kind of has these big scandals that happened when he was governor that, again, I guess the Harris campaign would rather deal with those than the issues presented by Mark Kelly or Shapiro or Beshear, but they're not great. It's not a great record. So if you want to know about the Feeding Our Future scandal, this is a fraud scheme that happened due to COVID relief funds in Minneapolis, where I think a group of people, basically the way I understand it, there was a restaurant, like a mom and pop type restaurant somewhere around the Twin Cities that was basically a gas station restaurant, and they had like 2 booths in there or something. Like, this is not a big restaurant, and they started taking in money for that were COVID relief funds to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, saying that it was a part of some program that would like feed underprivileged families while school was out. So they were saying that they had, you know, from going from a 2-booth restaurant or 4-booth restaurant in a gas station, they went from that to giving out meals all throughout the state of Minnesota. They just like automatically had this apparatus to deliver that. And if you know anything about logistics, you know that that's like highly improbable. But there were no brakes on the party or anything like that. Like, there was no people doing checks and balances to make sure that this was legit. And so the numbers that these people were reporting of like meals that they were feeding to people, I think there was one thing in Faribault where they, Faribault's like a small town in southern Minnesota. They were claiming to be giving out like twice the number of meals per day as there are residents of Faribault, or it was something like that. And really what ended up happening is they spent this $250 million some dollars on like fraud, basically. So they bought homes in like nice areas of Minnesota, like Prior Lake is like a nice area on a lake. They bought a house in Africa. I don't know if this is the same scandal where some of the money ended up with Al-Shabaab. And then this brings up another part, which this is why things never get done in Minnesota. When this does get brought up, people typically say that it's racist. And the reason they say that is because this was all done by Somalian immigrants. So there's a big Somalian community in Minnesota, bigger than anywhere else in the country. If you know Ilhan Omar, she's the congressman from Minnesota's 5th congressional district, which is like Minneapolis. Ilhan Omar is Somalian. What happened with the Somalian immigrants actually is like there was a genocide going on, and we took the party that was doing the genociding, not the party being genocided. And I believe Ilhan Omar's dad was like a general in that effort. And then they all came over here, and some of them committed this fraud. So, you know, they have these like mom and pop little businesses. They say that they're now like this major COVID relief meals factory. I think they won awards for this. They're giving out like thousands and thousands of meals to hungry Minnesotans every day, and they were spending it all themselves. I think less than $100,000 of the tens of millions they stole actually went to like feeding Minnesotans. So it's kind of a bummer, right? And like they're never gonna be able to pay that money back. I think they went on these lavish vacations. It was like a network of people. And again, the reason this doesn't really get covered is because, quite frankly, they're Somalian, and the media is really weird with like talking about that. Like, they don't want to come off as racist. Now, interestingly, the trials for this are ongoing, and they just found a bunch of the people that were tried guilty. But in the middle of this trial, one of the jurors said a woman, again, Somalian woman, showed up with like $100,000 in cash or something at her doorstep and like gave the money to this juror and was like didn't say anything, but just like, here you go, like to try and get them to acquit. So that woman ended up like reporting it to the court and stuff, and then she was taken off the jury. But like, it's sketchy, right? And again, like, this just, nobody cares. Like, nobody in Minnesota cares. And then with the 2020 riots, like, again, everybody knows what happened with George Floyd. Everybody has their opinions on that. The problem with the riots and stuff was they kept getting worse and worse and worse and spreading further and further and further out. So the location it happened is like kind of midway which is like south of Minneapolis. It spread to my neighborhood by the third night. There were massive riots. I lived on top of basically a mall, like an outdoor mall type area. The area is completely decimated. It made its way up into like downtown Minneapolis proper. A lot of businesses were just like completely taken out. The Minneapolis, like especially uptown, like it still hasn't really recovered. And that was like the cool, trendy, hip area for like young people to go live in. So like I lived at the corner of Lake and Hennepin. If you're familiar with the Twin Cities, those are two really like those are the biggest streets. And even months after, by like up until I could move out when my lease was up, like they would do drag races in the street, not the RuPaul kind. Like they would do like street races, and like you couldn't walk on the street anymore. It used to be pretty walkable. You couldn't do that because you would get hit by a car, and that was all put on Walz. So I remember like Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who's a bleeding heart liberal, massive liberal, he blamed Walz for not calling in the National Guard. I also remember Walz got into it with Trump, saying, I'm not going to call in the National Guard, and Trump was like, I'm going to call it to you anyways because it's getting that bad. And that entered into this whole feud between them too. For a long time, like Walz just wouldn't answer questions about it. So I remember I was watching KARE 11, which is like the local NBC affiliate, and Belinda Jensen, who's like a long time, very well respected reporter, was like, I just keep refreshing Twitter. This is 2 a.m. She's like, I keep refreshing Twitter. I keep trying to see who is coming. Like, what are you guys going to do to stop this? Because we're just watching the city up in flames. If you remember, I believe this is where the headline "fiery but mostly peaceful protests" came in. If you remember that meme, there was an actual, I think it was CNN or something, was standing in front of the Target on Lake Street, which was just fully engulfed in flames. Or maybe it was the AutoZone, because they burned down an AutoZone and a liquor store on like Minnehaha, anyways, kind of where the riot was really bad at, like the epicenter. And it was just completely engulfed in flames, and the media was like, well, it's mostly peaceful. It's like, not really. Like, that doesn't look very peaceful to me. This is like, I mean, the 3rd Ward Minneapolis Police Precinct was completely taken over by rioters. So like the police in the middle of the night bailed. They got a bunch of files out of there and they all bailed and let the rioters just overtake the building. They still have not rebuilt up that precinct. And again, a lot of that went on Walz because he refused to call in the National Guard early. When he finally did call the National Guard in, he didn't bring them to the epicenter of the riots. He brought them to like the Capitol in the Minneapolis Federal Reserve building, which shows you like that's how close Antifa and these terrible like domestic terrorists were to potentially overthrowing actual government buildings. And that is in Minnesota. Okay. This is in America in 2020. Then the worst part of all of that is, so Walz got a lot of blame from that. A lot of people were really not happy with Walz. And in 2022, again, we just don't really have a functioning party here. We just couldn't put it over the, it was enough removed. 2 years was enough time for people to not really be thinking about that anymore. And people still elected Walz. So that's a bummer. Like that shows like he was so unpopular. Even the mainstream non-political news in Minnesota was calling out Walz, and he still won in 2022. To me, that's not a testament of how good of a politician Walz is. It's a testament to how shitty the MNGOP is. But Democrats don't see it that way. And I wonder what more skeletons will come out. But then where Kamala comes into those riots too is she was raising money before she became the VP pick for getting those people out on bail. So the money that she helped raise went to bail these people out who went back and started rioting again and they had a pretty high attrition rate, just adding to the lawlessness. And again, apparently that is what the left would rather relive or relitigate than the pro-Palestine stuff, even though Walz is still a Zionist. So I don't know. I think that I understand where he has appeal, where there are some people who just think he's like a kind of like dinky Midwestern dad, he's like, oh, okay. He's definitely not threatening to Kamala. I think that was the big problem with Shapiro. If you put a Shapiro speech next to a Kamala speech, everybody wants Shapiro to be the guy in charge, not her. And I think that they didn't want him to overshadow her. Kind of reminds me of like the Tim Kaine pick by Hillary Clinton. But so that's kind of my thoughts on Walz. I think that he's a pretty beatable, pretty liberal candidate. And for every Democrat you see saying like, oh, he's just amazing, like, it's got a lot, there's a lot there to pick apart. And the things, again, that they hammer home that he's good on, he's not really. But then I want to bring that, and then to finally wrap that point up, how much do we want to talk about the 2020 riots again? I keep talking all the time on Twitter about like a vibe shift. There's been a vibe shift. People don't want to do the woke language thing anymore. They don't want to do the like, you must like put your fist up. They don't want to do that. So maybe that's what they're factoring in, and they're saying like people just don't really care anymore. But I wanted to explain, because today is the Missouri primary, so I wanted to explain kind of, I think that there's something really indicative of the vibe shift that I quote tweeted earlier over the weekend, and I wanted to explain this to make my point clear. So, last week we saw in the Olympics that there was athletes who are intersex or something, I don't know, they have normal male levels of testosterone, who were competing in women's boxing and really like beat the shit out of a woman, basically, in the Olympics. But they have a female passport and all of this, so it became a thing of like, this upset people on the right. And then people on the left responded to it. Well, one woman took it into her hand. I think she was running for like secretary of the Missouri, like the Republican endorsement for like the Missouri Republican Party. I don't know. But she took it upon herself to, I think that she's polling like pretty low. This is not a real candidate, okay? She puts on an Olympic shirt. She goes out. She gets the intern to film her. And she, in her video, drops the F slur. Okay, so like the F slur for gay people. I'm not going to say it. Even though it's become very much more normalized for people to say it, I'm not going to say it. She starts just screaming the F slur left and right about like what's about this situation, calling the people the F slur. Again, this isn't a transgender athlete. It's something different. So it didn't really make sense to use it there. I kept quote tweeting it, saying that this is the vibe shift. And I'm not saying that because I condone using that language, because I actually don't. I said that because this proves my point. If there was a Republican, even if they were polling at 2% anywhere in the nation in 2020 using the F slur repeatedly, every single Republican senator would have, and congressional candidate in a vulnerable district would have to put out like a tweet or a statement disavowing that. Okay? Every single one. We would be having a national conversation for 2 weeks on end about like, is it okay to use the F slur? It's absolutely not. All Republicans use the F, whatever. That hasn't happened. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of you listening don't know about this. Okay? But this happened like a week ago. She's going to lose her primary today, but whatever. So this is all going on. And then Democrats aren't even really that worried about her saying the slur. They're just going straight into like, it's not a trans athlete, it's intersex, and it's a difference. And it's like, you guys aren't even mad about the slur either. Nobody cares about the slurs anymore. Nobody cares about like appearing perfect in the perfect language and all of this. It's over. Like the policing on that front, people are just sick of it. They're over it. That's what I mean by the vibe shift. And to me, when we're moving forward, has Kamala and Walz, have they just factored in like nobody really cares to talk about those riots anymore? They don't like that they happened, and a large portion of the population is going to tune it out, and we can afford to have them tune that out. I think yes. I think a large portion has. Same with a large portion of the right is going to vote right no matter what, because they don't want to be lectured to anymore. That's what I mean by the vibe shift. I think that this is totally happening. I think that this is totally a thing. And I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts on this. So if you want me to make more TikToks about this, I will. All right. That cut off. So I don't know where I left off there, but I think just to wrap up with like the status of the race, I'm getting really uncomfortable and really annoyed with Republicans who are acting like the race is over and it's all in for Kamala, because we're seeing poll numbers that are like pretty good for her. I think she's probably maxed out. I think she's probably topped out at her current numbers. I don't think this Walz thing adds anything to her. I think it doubles down on like them being progressive and super liberal. That probably shores up their base. But again, right now, I keep saying this with her poll numbers. She's at like 95% with Democrats in these polls, which is higher than Obama and Biden were. They were at like 92%. Why did she pick a vice presidential candidate that will shore up the base if she's already got a larger percentage of the base than any other recent candidate in history? Obama, Biden, Clinton. Why did she pick somebody to like really double down on the base? Why? If she has that much of a share, it's because the numbers that we're seeing right now are not accurate. You don't choose a candidate that doubles down for your base if you believe that you have such a large percentage of the base, which is what the public polling shows. To me, what's probably going on is the private polling is showing that Pennsylvania is not winnable, even with Shapiro. As Pennsylvania goes, Michigan and Wisconsin will likely go too. So what Kamala needs to do is be competitive in the Sun Belt and in Georgia. And so Walz, they think, will be a better pick in the Sun Belt in Georgia. I also was hearing from somebody that internals were all showing that all states were going towards Kamala except for Arizona. Trump has maintained a pretty good sized lead in Arizona. He's also got a pretty good lead in Georgia, and people are going to act like what he said in the rally the other day is going to ruin him in Georgia. I don't think that it will. So I guess I'll wrap this up with saying that like it has always been a harder path for Kamala to make it to 270 than Trump. Even with her swapping out, she's basically back at Biden's pre-debate numbers. This is not a landslide for her by any means. They initially swapped Biden out because his only path was winning Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. To me, the Walz pick says we're kind of done with Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and we're going to focus on the Sun Belt. I don't know, especially because he's a Midwest governor. You'd think that he'd help them up there, but with his like fracking ban, all of that stuff, like again, like I was watching Harry Enton on CNN talk about how like his poll numbers, how he polled with like small town voters for governor just was not good. And again, there's barely an opposition party here in Minnesota. So it's not like those small town voters just were inundated with like Republican messaging that Walz is bad for them. They weren't inundated with really like messaging at all. And they still don't like Walz. They still don't. So that tells me that a lot of these rural voters and stuff, it's going to be hard for them to make up. So they're doubling down on the base. They're doubling down on the progressives. And they're going to hope that turns out for them in, Nevada, Arizona, Georgia. To me, that's what they're doing with this pick. I don't know, but that's kind of where my head is at. And so for my friends that are Republicans who are saying, oh my God, this means like it's going to be like the most liberal ticket ever. I don't know why you guys are saying that this is like a sure Kamala win, because it's not. It is not. So that's my thoughts on like the election, the vibe shift, Walz as a pick. I'm so curious to hear you guys' thoughts. So comment on YouTube, comment on Spotify, text me, DM me, or not text me, but like DM me on Instagram, DM me on, TikTok. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but have a great rest of your day, guys. Sorry this is up a bit late, and we'll talk tomorrow.
An Excelsior Studios original production. April 26, 2023 was a normal day for most in the suburbs of Indianapolis, but it was shaping up to be a very bad day for 25-year-old Megan Stoner, who was notified of a warrant out for her arrest.
9 charges for corrupt business influence fraud, where the loss is between $750,000 and $50,000, and theft.
And unfortunately for Megan, she would not be navigating her newfound legal troubles in private, because a community of hundreds who had been quietly watching her for years was assembling on the internet to discuss their experiences with her, which ranged from bizarre to dangerous to outright criminal, arguably worse than what Megan had been charged with.
Basically what she did was emotionally manipulated and I'll say abused even me for about nearly these 10 years.
And like, she will suck you dry. Any inch you give her, she just takes them out. Like,
Google number after Google number. You block the one, she's not done yet. She's going to get that last word.
The second you let her in, she takes over. And I mean, I would wake up to 20, 30, 40 notifications. I mean, she was scrolling back through things from my high school.
He's a dangerous human being.
And the strangest thing of all is, as her case unfolded, she continued to interact with this online community, which she called her haters, which was made up of business owners she had scammed, politicos from throughout the country that she had solicited for donations, a network of evangelical pastors located outside of the United States, a local brigade of moms who had called out her antics in Facebook groups for years, and even a sex shaman ended up coming together to solve crimes that she had not yet been caught for, and were able to catch her after she ran from the police for a month and finally put her in jail. So, how did this self-described political consultant, mental health advocate, teacher, and sexual assault survivor get into this mess in the first place? And how much of her story that she had told of herself on social media for years was actually true? That's what we'll explore here every Thursday on Don't Waste This Fucking Podcast, the story of Megan Stoner.